Hello, good afternoon, dear participants, speakers, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you for joining us today for the KLRTC 42, Getting into Actions, Disaster Prevention for Cities Resilience. Before we start, allow me to do the housekeeping announcement. The first, it is suggested that participants are requested to change their name in the following format: name, city, or institutions. Second, as a general rule, if you are not speaking, please put your microphones off or mute. If you wish to speak, click the raise hand button at the bottom of your screens. Once acknowledged by the moderator, you may unmute your microphone. So you have comments or questions, you may also submit them via the chat box. We will address them as the time permits. And meeting documents can be downloaded at www.uclgaspac.org. And also, please be informed that meeting will be recorded for documentations. Perhaps we can start now, and I will over the sessions to our moderator for today, Dr. Mizan Bisri, Associate Professor, Kobe University, Japan. Over to you, Pak Mizan.
Thank you very much, Pak Aldrin. Excellencies, Madam, Sir, distinguished participants. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Selamat siang. Konnichiwa, magandang hapon. A very good afternoon to you all. Welcome to the KLRTC 42, Getting into Action, Disaster Prevention for Cities Resilience. My name is Mizan Bisri from Kobe University and Chari, and I am honored to be your moderator today. The concept of disaster resilient cities always attract interest, attention, and initiatives from stakeholders across the globe, since cities are the locus of major societal exposure to various hazards and at the same time, blessed with various means and capacity for risk reduction, response, and recovery. Unfortunately, not all cities are resilient, at least for the time being. As a result of global warming and climate change, cities are more vulnerable to the increasing hazard, especially in the high-density and urban outskirt areas. Extreme weather events that continue to increase in intensity and frequency, breaking previous records of damages and losses associated with natural hazards, all indicating upward trend, disrupting citizens' daily lives, and also pushing back the result of development. Cities' decision about investment, planning, infrastructure development, land use, and also land control are vital for increasing resilience, to make sure that all initiatives are pointing toward risk reduction and not risk creation. Helping cities evade losses from disasters will directly improve urban resilience that rapidly safeguards development gains for future generations. It has been observed that lack of regulatory framework, unplanned cities and urbanizations, inadequate capacities of local authorities, lack of funding, uncoordinated information, corruption, and unlawful activities are among the main challenges to achieve disaster-resilient cities. Cities should also continuously strengthen their ability to manage ongoing stresses to better prepare for, withstand, and also recover from acute shocks resulting from a disaster. The development of skills and knowledge of cities administrators and planners will help decision makers and municipal leaders to determine where to reform policies and invest and plan to increase their resilience. Therefore, KLRTC and also UCLG Asia Pacific have the initiative to collaborate through this program in addressing various issues and challenges in creating an effective policy and the right direction for cities towards sustainability. The KLRTC 42 webinar will address the climate challenges part of urban resilience in disaster risk management. We will hear about systemic risk and also making cities resilience 2030 initiatives, ICT as the city's enabler towards resilience, and also two inter-cities perspective from countries in Southeast Asia, especially in terms of flood mitigation, flood management, as well as typhoon or disaster preparedness, and in general, leveraging from the city planning and also development. At the end of this webinar, hopefully participants are expected to be able to understand the global context of disaster risk reduction and climate change, identify challenges and opportunities in making cities resilience 2030, and also to understand the best practices by cities in overcoming potential disasters. We are grateful with the presence of honorable speakers in today's webinar. We will be having a welcoming remark from the Honorable Datuk Sri Haji Mahadi bin Chengah, Mayor of Kuala Lumpur, a keynote presentation, two thematic presentations, and another two presentations bringing in intercities perspective. Due to brief period of question and answer, I would encourage all participants to also type their question and comments in the chat box. And likewise, I would encourage distinguished speakers to respond in writing if possible. And during Q&A, I will select and address some of the questions to the speakers. Without a further ado, I would like to invite and also introduce distinguished Mayor of Kuala Lumpur. Can you please show the profile, Pak Aldi? Datuk Sri Mahadi Chengah, Mayor of Kuala Lumpur. Datuk Sri Mahadi bin Chengah is a Malaysian civil servant who is currently serving the 13th Mayor of Kuala Lumpur. His career in city planning started in 1983 as a town planner, and his last post was as Authority Executive Director Planning in 2019. His 36 years of service in the City Hall is an advantage in terms of knowledge, skills, and also insightful experience in terms of administration of cities and planning policies for the authority. With his vast experience and also leadership qualities, Datuk Sri Mahadi Chengah is able to drive Kuala Lumpur to continue towards excellence and raise the federal capital to become a caring city. Datuk Sri has a degree in town planning from University Technology Malaysia. He also pursued his master in the field at the University in Glasgow, Scotland. Datuk Sri, we are honored to have you here, and please, the time and screen is yours for the welcoming remarks. Over to you, sir.
Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Thank you, Dr. Mizan Bisri, for the kind introduction. Distinguished panelists and participants, Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh, and a very good afternoon to one and all. I would like to extend my appreciation to our host, the Kuala Lumpur Regional Training Center, or in short KLRTC, and UCLG ASPAC for organizing this online seminar. Thank you everyone for taking the time to join us today. Welcome to KLRTC 42. Ladies and gentlemen, Kuala Lumpur is today one of the most densely populated and urbanized cities in Malaysia, spanning 243 square kilometers. To give you a better idea of our growth trajectory, the current population of Kuala Lumpur stands at 1.8 million, and we expect this figure to breach the 2.5 million mark by 2040. Indeed, nurturing a city of this scale and size requires sophisticated city planning and clear foresight. Sustainability is all the more relevant now, considering the urgency of climate change, which has impacted Kuala Lumpur and cities worldwide. We can clearly see it here in Kuala Lumpur in the form of increased incidences of flash floods, landslides, freak storms, and the rising temperatures. As the caretaker of this city, we have a deep awareness and understanding of the need to urgently address the current and future consequences of climate change. To that end, and in line with our commitment to the Paris Agreement, Kuala Lumpur City Hall took a solid step forward by spearheading the Kuala Lumpur Low Carbon Society Blueprint 2030 in 2016. This blueprint proposes comprehensive solutions and advocates for a low-carbon lifestyle among the citizens of Kuala Lumpur, thus supporting our vision of transforming Kuala Lumpur into a sustainable, livable, resilient, and inclusive city for all. Going hand in hand with our environmental aim is a focus on creating a Kuala Lumpur which promotes a healthy economy and safeguards the well-being of its communities. In achieving this triple bottom line, we have also developed the Climate Action Plan 2050 for the city to accelerate our progress. Importantly, this Kuala Lumpur Climate Action Plan 2050 outlines our strategy to enhance the resilience of our city and improve disaster prevention, such as the flood management and response plan. Ladies and gentlemen, as mentioned, there have been increasing incidences of flash floods and heavy rainstorms in Kuala Lumpur. To address this issue effectively, Kuala Lumpur City Hall has formed a dedicated crisis management team as part of its interim measure to mitigate flash floods. The team consists of senior officials from Kuala Lumpur City Hall, the Malaysian Meteorological Department, Irrigation and Drainage Department, Malaysia Civil Defence Department, and Fire and Rescue Department. With this team on hand, we are able to carry out a variety of important tasks in an effective and efficient manner, including rescue operations, cleaning of clogged drains, desilting of flood retention ponds, as well as positioning sandbags to stop the overflowing water from the river. Nonetheless, fully resolving the issue of flash floods is part of a longer journey. To this end, we are also working on long-term flood mitigation projects. This includes studying the possibility of building underground water storage within root reserves, as well as river channel improvement projects that will entail erecting flood walls along certain areas of the river to replace sandbags. Ladies and gentlemen, technological innovations have played a critical role in accelerating our vision of shaping a resilient city. Leveraging CCTVs, we are now able to obtain real-time information on areas affected by floods. Additionally, the use of CCTV has also enabled our crisis management team to divert traffic away from flooded areas, thus ensuring the safety of road users. The enhancement of our communication channels does not stop there. We have sped up the dissemination of accurate safety information as well as regular updates by utilizing a mobile application called MOBIS, M-O-B-I-S, to disseminate information through mobile phones. This information assists our city dwellers in avoiding flooded roads. With all these efforts, we successfully prevented the recent floods from damaging KLI's properties. Ladies and gentlemen, I would like to take this opportunity to remind you that we need to work together to take care of our city. Bearing this in mind, I am pleased to share that we have received many volunteers from amongst our own officers, NGOs, and members of the public who have willingly contributed their time and energy to help clean clog drains and through litter picking or plugging activities around the city. These activities, organized by Kuala Lumpur City Hall, have continuously received growing support from KLIs, reflecting their spirit and love for our city, Kuala Lumpur. Ladies and gentlemen, before I end my speech, I would like to extend my gratitude to those who have been supporting our efforts, and I hope that more people will join us in making Kuala Lumpur a sustainable, resilient, and inclusive city. With that, I thank all of you for joining us at this webinar, and I trust this session will prove fruitful in promoting a better understanding of the importance of disaster prevention. Thank you. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.
Thank you very much, Honorable Datuk Sri Haji Mahadi Binci Ngah. Thank you very much, sir, for your very insightful presentation and also welcoming remarks. We learned a lot in terms of the creation of Kuala Lumpur as an inclusive, healthy, sustainable, and also resilient cities, which I'm sure will be an inspiration for cities in Asia, Pacific, and beyond to become resilient cities in the coming future. Thank you very much. Without further ado, I would like to proceed with the next keynote presentation on the importance of regional and local cooperation for combating disaster. This is a video message from Dr. Bernadia Irawati Chandra Dewi, Secretary General of United Cities and Local Governments Asia Pacific. Before the video, I will read her biography. Dr. Chandra Dewi is the first woman Secretary General of the UCLG Regional Section. She has been working in urban development and related fields for more than 15 years. She was selected as one of prominent women whose work making impact in Asia Pacific in 2018 by Government Insider Asia. Her interests are on strategic urban planning, climate change, disaster management, water management, women empowerment, and local governance. Dr. Chandra Dewi received her PhD in urban engineering from the University of Tokyo, Japan, and 2 master degrees in atmospheric physics from Nagoya University and also in public policy from the National University of Singapore. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome the video message keynote presentation from Dr. Chandra Dewi. Colleagues from UCLG, please play the video. Thank you.
Honorable Mayor of Kuala Lumpur, Datuk Sri Mahadi bin Cheng Ah, good afternoon. Dear speakers from Jakarta, Pak Joko, Liza from Makati, Sarah from UNDRR, Kendra from CityNet, and our moderator today from Kobe University, Dr. Misan Bisri, and all distinguished participants, ladies and gentlemen. Very good afternoon, good morning. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Greetings from UCLG ASPAC Secretariat in Jakarta. First of all, I'd like to warmly welcome everyone to this important session, KLRTC 42, Getting into Action, Disaster Prevention for Cities Resilience, that is jointly organized by City Hall of Kuala Lumpur and UCLG ASPAC under the framework of Kuala Lumpur Regional Training Center. The recent MOU we signed between UCLG ASPAC and City Hall of Kuala Lumpur just actually a few weeks ago. This has further strengthened our commitment and of course our responsibility to capacitate cities and local governments in dealing with various issues, and one of them is resilience and disaster risk reduction. We know that more than half of world's populations already live in cities, in urban and metropolitan areas, and cities have been experiencing fast growth and rapid urbanizations, especially in these regions, Asia Pacific. There are cities that have a population more than 1 million and up to even more than 10 millions, like Jakarta, Manila, Bangkok, Beijing, New Delhi, Tokyo, Seoul. And this is to show that these growing cities have been facing also challenges. And we need to take into consideration that Asia Pacific is actually the most disaster-prone region in the world. And at the same time, climate change has worsened the vulnerability towards our cities living with the potential risks and upcoming threats or hazards from series of flooding, landslides, tidal waves, typhoon, cyclone. We see floods almost in many cities. And even the cities that have not experienced flood, this time also got floods. So this is to show that the challenges are there and we need to find solutions. And we also know that risk can be reduced and we can transfer those risks into minimum level by increasing our capacity, by having strong political will. And most importantly, by having good collaborations among different stakeholders. So we also experienced COVID. Over the past 2 years, we have struggled in handling this COVID-19 pandemic. But this COVID-19 pandemic has actually taught us a very clear lessons that no single country or city can work alone to cope the calamity or emergency. And there is no single country can provide global solutions. Local governments are the closest government body to citizens. And so when disaster strikes, it requires local governments to take quick actions as the first line of response. Local governments have the important role to prevent and reduce vulnerability and to make sure that our community are in safe places. This is our duty, and we need, of course, to make sure that no one left behind and no place left behind. So local governments, we all also responsible to mainstream this disaster risk reduction into our planning and management. And there are already good examples how many cities in these regions manage to minimize those risks and manage to mainstream those disaster risks into their city planning, city management, and of course, into implementations. So looking at those facts, we know that we only have 7 years remaining here to achieve these global 2030 targets. So we all have to accelerate the decade of actions. Resilience is a state of ability to face, to adapt, and overcome every obstacle and setback, whether it happens suddenly or incrementally. So in order to be resilient, we need to always be ready for anything that might happen to us. Our cities must be ready. Our people must be ready. So therefore, we also need to shift our state of mind from being passive and only react to those obstacles to be more active and prepare and getting ready for everything. We cannot stay silent and do business as usual. And I think you all agree we need to act fast, we need to act right, and we need to act together. So together with UNDRR and UN Habitat, in 2020, UCLG has joined this big initiative or global initiative, Making Cities Resilient 2030, MCR 2030. This is a global initiative that aims to help cities and local governments build their resiliences against all forms of disaster. The new MCR 2030 actually has been co-created by 11 international organizations and city networks. That of course include UCLG as a co-chair. So the new MCR 2030 connects with an online dashboards that help and support cities and local governments to leverage commitments and also to show updated situations like city profiles, local DRR action plans and strategies, as well as implementations, and also identify the good enabling environment to achieve the resilience. So if your city is not part of this MCR 2030, please join us. You will later on get some explanations what MCR 2030 is and what you will gain from this MCR 2030. So in this webinar hosted by City Hall of Kuala Lumpur and UCLG ASPAC as part of Kuala Lumpur Regional Training Center, we want to provide opportunity for you to learn among yourself, to learn from other cities like Jakarta, Makati, Yokohama, and because they have been actively moving towards resiliency. And definitely, I want to see more and more cities join this MCR 2030, so we can create much bigger impact together. So UCLG ASPAC promotes the peer-to-peer learning and also sharing practical experiences, success and failure stories from local governments, and also provide training and capacity building programs and use various assessment tools for strategy development, such as this Resilient Module 1 and 2 that were developed by UCLG World and UCLG ASPAC to help local governments understand this disaster risk and build back better as well. So this 2022 is a busy year for many of us. We have actually 3 major events. First was the global platform for DRR that was successfully organized in Bali by UNDRR and hosted by Government of Indonesia. Many of us were in Bali in May. And second, we will be having this Asia Pacific May Ministerial Conference on Disaster Risk Reduction in Brisbane in September. I really hope that you will be able to join the meeting in Brisbane, because there will be a local leaders consultation as well. And another big event that is going to be happening here in Asia is UCLG World Congress and ASPAC Council Meeting 2022 in October in Daejeon, South Korea. So please don't miss those events in Brisbane and in Daejeon, because big issues will be discussed, including this, of course, resiliency in the cities and local governments. Once again, I'd like to thank City Hall of Kuala Lumpur, especially Datuk Mahadi for his leadership, of course, his commitment for the strengthening of Kuala Lumpur Regional Training Center, and to also have these sessions. And I also like to thank all speakers for joining us today. And of course, all the participants. I really hope that you find this session fruitful, and let's bring actions toward a better world, because we only have one planet that we need to protect. It's not only for our generation, but for our next generations. Terima kasih, and I should not forget to thank KLRTC team as well, and of course my team who put all together this session nicely. Thank you and terima kasih. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.
Waalaikumsalam. Thank you very much, colleagues from UCLG, who has shared the video message containing the keynote presentation on importance of regional and local cooperation for combating disaster from Dr. Chandra Dewi, Secretary General of UCLG ASPAC. I hope distinguished participants find it fruitful and also inspirational, where Dr. Chandra Dewi touched upon various big agenda in terms of risk reduction, resilience building, and also sustainable development, and also remind us about the importance of this decade, the decade of action. And before we go deeper with the thematic presentation and also the experience from the cities, I would like to invite everyone to open your camera for a virtual group photo. And I would like to hand over to Pak Chandra to give the go sign for this photo ops. Thanks.
Thank you, Pak Bisri. Please, everyone, ladies and gentlemen, open your camera. We would like to take a virtual group photo. Okay, can you open the camera, please? Just only 5 seconds. Okay, everyone stand by. I will counting for 3, 2, 1. Okay, thank you so much. Thank you, everyone. I hand over to you, Pak Bisri.
Thank you very much, Pak Chandra. From now on, we will proceed with the first presentation on disaster risk in global and regional context, which will be delivered by a colleague of mine, Ms. Sarah Wade Apicella, a program officer at the United Nations Office for Disaster Risk Reduction, in charge with the portfolio of KT based in Incheon, where she is currently developing training programs for national implementation of the Sendai Framework for Disaster Risk Reduction, with a focus on coherence with the Climate Change Convention and the Sustainable Development Goals. She was previously managing editor of the Prevention Web, the then UNISDR Disaster Risk Reduction Community Knowledge Service Platform, from 2017 2007 to 2015, coordinator of Information Management for Disaster Risk Reduction Network, and also a member of the Climate Knowledge Brokers Group. Prior to joining the United Nations, she was an editorial consultant directed towards adult learning developments and held senior positions in online media strategy and production of Newsweek, Fortunes, and other startups. She received Bachelor of Arts in Cultural Anthropology from the Smith College. Sarah, the time is yours.
Great.
The screen as well. Over to you.
Thank you. Please let me know if you are not seeing my screen. So thank you, Dr. Bishri. Thank you to UCLG ASPAC. Thank you and greetings to Mr. Mayor Mahadi bin Chanya, and of course to Dr. Chandradwi and all of the colleagues from UCLG. To my fellow panelists, ladies and gentlemen, it is my pleasure to speak with you today. And I've been given the topic of looking at disaster risk in global and a regional context. And what I would like to share with you today are some of the key challenges that we've already heard from the mayor and from Dr. Benaria, some of the challenges, but really putting this in the context of our global necessity to take urgent action and to emphasize again the criticality of taking the most localized action and thereby really engaging the cities as the most critical leader to engage citizens, as we've already heard. And we know that progress on disaster risk reduction must be urgently prioritized as a precondition for sustainable development, as our UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres has so clearly stated. And we also know that the world is failing to address climate change and other existential threats with the urgency they require. In fact, we know that this setting is putting humanity on a spiral of self-destruction, as UN Deputy Secretary General Amina Mohammed has said. And we see in this image, of course, children who are calling for immediate action. And in fact, it is the youth who are telling us, adults, that we have not acted quickly enough. And yet we know we have so much knowledge, from traditional and local knowledge to available science and to technology. And we've already heard in the opening keynote speeches some of the actions that are being taken. So in fact, the world is not on track to reducing risk. If the current trends continue, we know that the number of disasters per year globally may increase from around 400 in terms of accounting in 2015 to as many as 560 per year by 2030. This is a projected increase of 40%, and this during the lifetime of the Sendai Framework for Disaster Risk Reduction, which many of you will know is the guiding global policy negotiated, co-created, developed, and adopted by the UN member states from 2015 to 2030. And this framework seeks to reduce not only losses from disasters, but also risk itself. And we know then that especially in the climate crisis and the increased urbanization and the complexity of risk and the compounded nature of risk that we have seen in particular, very visible now as we have all dealt with COVID, that it is really critical that we take actions not only to reduce risk, but also to do so coherently with all of our climate action and sustainable development action. And here you see on the screen some additional statistics. We know that every year low and middle income countries are losing 10 times more of their GDP to disasters than high income countries. We know that the number of droughts are forecast to double by 2030, and yet extreme temperature events are set to triple. And this is leading to much of the flooding and increased landslide or even fire risk, much that we will hear today as some of the approaches taking to reduce and mitigate these hazard risks. And by 2020, although 120 countries had adopted disaster risk reduction strategies as called for by the Sendai Framework, and also by SDG 11 on the sustainable cities and SDG 13 on climate action and SDG 1 on poverty, although there were 120 country strategies, many countries still had yet to develop the strategies, and strategies that take a really comprehensive multi-hazard approach to risk. Now, this target also, as you know, calls for local disaster risk reduction strategies. And this is where the Making Cities Resilient 2030 and this grand partnership and the tools available can really help cities establish their baselines, review their progress, identify challenges, and take action to address those gaps. And then through participation, share the experience. Again, you'll be hearing after my presentation from some of the current experiences. So these trends do call for DRR and climate action in synergy. And as Sabar Hossain Chaudhry, who's a member of parliament, an honorary president of Bangladesh International Parliamentary Union, said at the Global Platform for Disaster Risk Reduction just last month, climate change adaptation does not exist without disaster risk reduction. So we know that there are challenges in our human action, actually. The human action is creating greater and more dangerous risk. The world is becoming increasingly interconnected, and the risks are cascading across geographies, across sectors, and pushing us really towards the existential limits. This is one of the main challenges outlined in our global assessment report on disaster risk reduction, also released just a couple of months ago. And what it requires is to build on existing know-how to transform systems to make them more resilient. So therefore putting resilience at the core, as we have heard, and developing enhanced approaches to address the risks in a more systemic way. We know that disaster impacts are increasingly cascading, that the risk creation is actually happening faster than we can reduce the risk, and therefore we must focus on resilience. We must think resilient. And this was one of the major outcomes of the global platform. We know that the human choices that we make are driving vulnerability and exposure to increasing losses. They are indeed spiraling. And we know that we need to change what we do. So here I would like to share briefly some recommendations from the Global Assessment Report and think about them in the context of cities. The tools and initiatives supported through Making Cities Resilient 2030 can help you to do this, but it's really about shifting very much the way we are thinking. We need to, and what we do, and the governance mechanisms. We need to measure what we value, reworking financial systems and adapting national fiscal planning and risk financing that also links to local knowledge. We need to understand that humans make different decisions are driven to make decisions differently based on their knowledge and their circumstance. So we need to think about how these biases are actually undermining risks. We need to, undermining our approaches to addressing risk. We need to look at what are the learning opportunities, including from local and indigenous knowledge. And we need to plan with, not against, how people actually make decisions. So this means an increasing call to ensure a very inclusive approach. We need to design systems that factor how the decisions are made, that consider the biases, and work with these people to recognize the role of perceptions and to recognize that risk analytics are helpful, but not the full answer. And finally, we need to reconfigure governance and financial systems to improve how we work across these different groups and silos. Now, in Asia Pacific, I just wanted to briefly highlight, you may not be familiar, but there is a scoping study that was done last year on cascading and systemic risk in Asia Pacific, and it does include a framework to help you guide your planning and decision making, and shares many case studies looking at the different dimensions of risk, looking at disaggregation of vulnerability exposure data, adaptive and integrated risk governance mechanisms, and different financing mechanisms. And you can see more on these recommendations and also from the Asia Pacific report and the Global Assessment report, as well as a summary of the outcomes of the recent global platform for disaster risk reduction, which focuses on this think resilience approach to governance, legislation, financing, climate action, ensuring inclusivity, nothing about us without us, universal early warning coverage, and focusing now our efforts on the COVID recovery to build that greener and more equitably, as well as strengthening our planning forward for the post-2030 agreements. Now, at the local level, I think most of you know, and you've already heard in the opening, the Making Cities Resilient 2030 is a global partnership that brings together more than 11 core partners and currently the participation of more than 1,100 cities with more than 200 entities now participating, including 15 national governments. And these entities are providing services that you can find to match the needs that you have in your city. So to view those, you'll need to join us. So I join in Bernarde's call to join us and access the dashboard, access the exchange of knowledge, and access the many tools available. And I'll end here. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Sarah, for your timely presentation. And we have heard about the disaster risk in the global and also regional context, especially Sarah touched upon the important understanding about the systemic and also cascading risk. And we will discuss what does it mean for cities risk assessment and also resilience building. And from there, we will call upon Mr. Kendra Hirata, who will deliver a presentation on cities enabler strengthening ICT for cities resilience against disaster. Mr. Kendra Hirata is a program development director of CityNet Yokohama Project Office. He has worked in both private and also public sectors for several years, conducting trainings and managing development projects. His previous experience includes leading a Japanese non-profit organization, conducting projects in developing countries, as well as several years of living and working in both developed and also developing regions. He brings a balanced perspective and has passion for development works. He previously worked for the CityNet Secretariat in Yokohama and was assigned to his new position upon Secretariat's relocation to Seoul. He continues to provide his expertise and plays an advisory role to city leaders by developing meaningful projects and capacity building programs on DRR, education, environment, and public health in the Asia Pacific region. Without further ado, Hirata-sama, the time is yours, please.
Okay, thank you very much, Dr. Mistry. Can you see my slide?
Yes.
Okay, very good. Okay, thank you very much once again, and good afternoon to all the participants. Honorable Mayor of Kuala Lumpur, Datuk Seri Haji Mahathir bin Jainga, Secretary General of UCLG ASPAC, Dr. Bernardia Idawati Chandradevi, esteemed panelists and moderator, as well as all the distinguished participants. I've been given this topic to present on strengthening ICT for cities resilient, but if I may, please allow me to go a bit beyond ICT to understand how we can better collect and utilize data and information for improving the overall resilience in the cities and the communities. Okay, so when we first think about resilience at the city level, first and foremost, we need to ask ourselves, how well do we know our city? Do we know the hazards that exist? Do we know historical information on disasters in the area? Are we prepared well enough? Right? So these are many questions that we can ask to ourselves, but if you think about it, it is all about data and information gathering and utilizing it effectively. In Japan, as most of you may know, we have 3 principles of DRM, which is rooted in the culture: self-help, mutual help, and public help. Among the 3, the top 2, self-help and mutual help, are the core part of the practice, which is common at individual and community levels. From schools to community groups, there is a well-established system and practice led by the locals. And these 2 principles basically ensure preparedness, awareness raising, and response to some extent, giving the residents the sense of safety. The 3rd principle, public help, is mainly for the authorities to undertake strategic planning on a wider scale, as well as to provide professional response whenever disasters happen. All 3 are practiced all 3 are practiced based on scientific and local data, which allow for specific planning and execution of the programs. So how do we go local with limited manpower or the budget? Often we hear about the budget issue when we try to conduct DR programs or activities, or the lack of human resources, or the difficulty in accumulating necessary data and information. As you can see here, there are some possible solutions to some of these issues that we can conduct locally. For example, if it's too expensive, we can use the local talents, which are very low cost and which are open source. If it is too foreign, we can, of course, work with the universities to bring in the participatory mapping routines. Or if it is very different than what the communities or the cities are used to, then we can train some of the youth who are very active in the communities to conduct some of the studies or the surveys. Or if it is too complex, we can always use the already available standards or digital platforms to address some of the issues. So if we did all these, how much data will we really have and where? In order to answer that, let's look into the possible sources of data and information. As you can see, there are many sources of data and information that we can find all over our city. The academia, of course, is a good source, along with the city itself and the private sector. A lot of the times, media or their archives have historical information which may be useful in planning. They may also have actual photo evidence, which will allow more precise identification of issues over time. And during disasters in many of our cities, police and the army are deployed during disasters, so they have their own records along with the hospitals as well. Also, one of the key sources of the data and information are the individual memories of the victims. If they are a survivor, then they will definitely have the story to tell. So if we just look around, there are plenty of sources that we can use for existing DR planning. But then comes the question of its authenticity and in what form do the data exist. A lot of the times, quality data or information may not be so high. Even if it is, it cannot be accessed. Often the data is not so accurate or not even documented. Especially the survivors' memories and stories are often overlooked. But in this digital age, these issues can be solved if we have the practice of keeping digital records and use it wisely. Even when we look into the city's various departments, most of it, or most of the departments have their own data and information which can be useful in various works of the city. But from our experience, we have also heard some departments do not have access to data of other departments. If, for example, fire or crisis management officers do not have access to the social welfare data, it would be extremely difficult for them to conduct search and rescue operations of senior citizens or people with disability whenever there's a big disaster. Of course, there are privacy issues in sharing of the data, but critical information can be shared without compromising the privacy of the individuals. So we know that if all the relevant data and information from various departments are interlinked and shared, our planning and budgeting and execution of the programs would become much easier. But why aren't we doing it? In the past few slides, I shared the theoretically viable ways of finding information and data and using it. But the reality is a bit different. This is a summarized analysis of our disaster cluster survey that we conduct each year. And as you can see, if I may draw your attention to the right side of the slide, where the priorities are stated, as seen in the overall priorities, all three are real and existing issues of the cities in our network. And in order to solve it, the missing link is the availability of digital data. As discussed previously, if we only could collect accurate data and make it accessible, justifying the budget or developing a strategic framework would have a proper basis and can be practical. As explained in the previous slide, we have plenty of data at the community and individual levels, which can be put to good use if collected through an integrated system so that the big data will serve as evidence to improve resiliency. So whether it's at the city level or the community level, low-cost, accurate collection methods and the analytical ability would be crucial for DRR strategic planning and execution of the programs. So if we have the data which is accurate and digital, we have the resources and we are ready to move forward, then the next step, I believe, would be to study the best practices and benchmark your own planning, which is localized to address your hazards and your concern. Allow me to share some examples through photos here. For example, Yokohama releases their updated disaster prevention strategies regularly, which contains all kinds of information on hazards, its prevention and mitigation strategies, and response techniques. It is based on years of data, which is simplified for the public to understand and is practical. And this allows for the public to strengthen their own self-help and mutual help strategies, which reduces the burden on the city during the response times. In many cities, for example, such as in Bandung, Indonesia, they have been conducting datathons, which engages the university students or the public to gather important data to help assist the city develop proper plans for the public. Another example, actually from one of our past projects, is from the city called Iloilo in the Philippines. After the 2009 Typhoon Frank, which inundated most of the entire city, residents started to draw their own contingency plans based on past experiences. Each barangay or village conducted their detailed profiling to map out all vulnerable aspects of their community and made strategic DRR plans. They mainstreamed this at all levels of the local government and have been practicing the necessary protocols since then. At the student level also, they developed programs through which students are capacitated to assist in their own way during planning and as well as programs. All of this is happening because they started gathering necessary data and information and was able to convince the city council for increasing disaster budget to conduct the activities. Another example is from Makati, who is also present here today. With the size of the city, Makati's DRM team is very aware of the level of planning and action that needs to go into effect to protect its citizens. In order to capacitate their first responders to enable swift and timely response, they have been training with Yokohama to maximize skills of their first responders. Again, this initiative and planning could not have been in place without proper background survey and information that Makati is risk-prone city, but disaster may be averted if high-level capacity building is in place. As such, at CityNet, we have been giving opportunities for the local governments in Asia-Pacific region to engage in cross-learning activities, particularly through the city-to-city cooperation, so that ideas can be exchanged and generated, and perhaps a good benchmark can be developed to address the challenges of the city. All these trainings and study visits or workshops are designed and developed with the data we collect from the members to specifically support their capacity development. These are not random projects, but these are developed based on the information, and the outcomes also directly connect to the targets of the targets and goals of the Sendai framework as well. Therefore, we strongly believe that the process of learning is extremely important to enable people to realize the wealth of data and information that are out there, which can be captured and utilized to develop an effective plan which addresses the need of that city or the community. The learning needs to begin early, and the DRR learning centers such as these are an important venue for the public to access information, experience the risks, and be able to strengthen the self-help and the mutual help part. Aside from technical cooperation, we also encourage our members to engage in schools and public as much as possible so that DRR does not become the work of the disaster department alone, but society as a whole. So having said that, data and ICT are important for resilience building. We need to give equal importance to how widely we can disseminate this accurate and science-based information to the public to enhance their understanding of the local hazards so that data collection becomes a participatory process and programs are developed accordingly as well. We believe that if the city is able to collect their own data through a participatory process, and if it is inclusive and have the accessibility for the public to understand it, we believe that it will truly address the resilience building at its core. So with that, I would like to conclude my presentation here. Thank you very much for listening.
Thank you very much, Hiratasama, for your kind presentation and also for highlighting some of the examples from the CityNet portfolio, not only in terms of ICT as the enabler, but also beyond that, how to make sense and how to optimize ICT availability. From the two thematic presentation, we will now move on to the intercities perspective. And for the first presentation, I will invite a presentation on Typhoon disaster preparedness, which will be delivered by Ms. Liza Ramos, Research and Planning Head at the Makati Disaster Risk Reduction and Management Office. Ms. Ramos is a licensed urban planner with more than 10 years of work exposure in project management and office administration. She is equipped by academics and also practical experience in a multicultural environment and has a proven track record in the fields of urban management, disaster risk reduction, climate change adaptation, heritage conservation, shelter, planning, international relations, among others. Distinguished participant, please join me to welcome Ms. Ramos. Ms. Ramos, the time and screen is yours.
Good day to all. So allow me to, I will not go through a very long introduction, but just allow me to start sharing with you Makati's initiatives on disaster preparedness through this presentation entitled Making Disaster Resilience a Way of Life, Makati City's Strategic Disaster Preparedness Measures. Makati is a highly urbanized city in the Philippines and one of the 17 local governments comprising Metro Manila. Progressive as the city may be, we are not spared of potential risks caused by natural, human-induced, biological, or technological hazards or threats. So what you can see on the slide is actually our impact estimation of a 200-year return cycle period of flooding in Makati caused by a worst-case scenario of typhoon. We anticipate as high as a 5-meter inundation in small portions of Makati, but 3-meter inundation is expected to be widely affecting our perimeter areas. But as we invest on resilience, we continue gathering updated weather and flood data, and hence the animated updated flood maps that you can see on the slide. Basically, we just want to share that we surely invest in understanding our risks, and this become our basis for our resilience planning. Next slide, please. So in order to address these hazards, we, of course, crafted our plans. Considered as our long-term strategic plan for building resilience is the Makati Disaster Risk Reduction and Management Plan 2019 to 2030, which will be fleshed out a little bit more in the succeeding slide. Supplementing the DRRM plan are our hazard-specific contingency plans, which are our preparedness and response plan for worst-case scenarios of typhoons and earthquakes. And with our COVID-19 experience, we have already updated these contingency plans to integrate measures that are infectious diseases sensitive. Complementing the DRRM Plan 2019 to 2030 on the aspect of climate change is the Local Climate Change Action Plan. While these are just few of the many supplemental and complementing city plans, this slide should basically give you the idea that our interventions have been well thought of in a very strategic approach. Next slide may be a little bit overwhelming with all of the boxes and arrows, but this just shows the 4 goals that the DRRM plan want to achieve. If you may notice, these 4 goals are exactly the same 4 out of the 7 targets of the Sunday Framework for Disaster Risk Reduction. These 4 goals were then converted into outcomes, which were then translated into strategic priority programs. The arrows just shows which of the programs contribute to the outcomes, which then directly or indirectly contribute to the DRRM plan goals. And particularly for our session today, I would like to give emphasis on the highlighted outcomes and priority programs in the slide. These are outcomes 3 and 4, and programs for risk information services, DRRM Education, and DRRM Community Organization, Participation and Empowerment, or DRRM COPE. I will give example interventions or activities that we do under these programs. But before I give you this, let me share with you our strategic stance in planning for disaster risk reduction and management, which has been influenced by recognized guiding principles and frameworks that you will see in my next 2 slides. First of which is through the use of the Disaster Resilience Scorecard of the UNDRR's MCR 2030. We've been using the MCR tool since the launch of the 10 Essentials in 2010. As a tool, it can help us identify our resilience gaps in numerical and web analysis format, as what you can see on the slide. This is actually the most recent assessment result of the accomplished scorecard of Makati. More than the numerical rating, it is really the actual gaps that we're most concerned of. And if we will take a look at the table, we tried addressing these gaps through the same priority programs of our DRRM plan that I've shown you earlier. Let me proudly share with you that with our long-time application of the MCR tools, we have already institutionalized their use in our annual planning and regular monitoring and evaluation, where the scorecard has been used as one of the references in developing our very own results-based monitoring and evaluation system. Another guiding principle is the resilience building framework that we learned and adopted from our longtime city partner, City of Yokohama, of course, through the CityNet Yokohama office. And this is the self-help, mutual help, and public health framework, which also basically translates our vision to make resilience a way of life in Makati. Every disaster preparedness measure that we do, we ensure that it is anchored on this guiding principle. Through our DRRM Education program, we capacitate individuals and families to help themselves during and after a disaster, and emphasize that they should also immediately help their communities, which we do through the DRRM COPE program. Part of our DRRM education messaging is that the city government may not be readily available to deploy resources immediately for reasons that other more severely affected areas may have been prioritized, or we ourselves may also have been affected by disasters, and in which case, public help would come a little later. Transparency, trust, and relationship building are important factors in ensuring the engagement of our communities, hence this messaging. And this we can ensure if we provide responsive programs, projects, and activities to our communities, which I shall be discussing in my next slides. First is DRRM education. With the aim to provide DRRM education, both formal and informal, to all sectors of the community in a sustainable way, we make sure that our activities are target-specific and as much as possible interactive or experiential-based. Thank you to Plus Arts and CityNet Yokohama for opening opportunities for us to explore #creative education. Yes, we've been partnering with Plus Arts and CityNet Yokohama for the establishment of the Makati DRRM Academy. While this academy is still a work in progress, most of our DRRM-related celebration activities are influenced by our learnings from Plus Arts. As you can see in the photos, Prior to the pandemic, we usually do a resilience fair type of celebration of the International Day for Disaster Risk Reduction, where activities like Spot the Hazard balloon popping and bucket relays for kids and other family members are encouraged to participate in. We also put up pop-up booths for our celebration of the National Disaster Resilience Month in various areas in Makati, where passers-by are invited to do disaster preparedness challenges like go bag preparation, knot tying, and hands-only CPR, among others. As we are in the digital era, we also aggressively make use of social media as part of our Drrm Education channel. Aside from My Makati, which is the official Facebook page of the city, our office also manages our very own Facebook page that serves as an advocacy and promotions page for the DRRM efforts of the city. Next is DRRM Cope. With the aim to build capacities of the communities to cope with disasters, we develop and implement activities to equip our community members with knowledge, skills, and even actual disaster preparedness supplies. What you can see on the slide are some of the photos of the measures that we have implemented. We organize and facilitate DRRM planning for our barangay or community officials for them to be able to develop their own barangay or community DRRM plans, and DRRM leadership and management capacity building activities for our youths, dubbed as the Makati Youth for Dream Session. We also provided go bags and hard hats for public school students in Makati and installed automated external defibrillators in all public buildings. These are just some of the examples of disaster preparedness interventions that we do at the community level. Perhaps you are noticing at this point that we're still talking about multi-hazard disaster preparedness measures of the city. So allow me to zoom into one of the most important interventions that we have embarked on, particularly related to typhoon preparedness of Makati. And this is our early warning system enhancement project under the Risk Information Services program. The Makati City's Early Warning System Enhancement Project aims to have an efficient system for providing accurate and real-time information needed for risk-informed decision-making and interventions for evacuation and other response operations. The city acknowledges that an EWS requires a blend of science and community practices. Hence, the project intends to marry these two through application in all of the 4 elements of EWS. And in order to realize this, we follow the recognized elements of an end-to-end early warning system as our project components. On this slide, you can clearly see how we contextualize these 4 components into the city's early warning system. I think there's no better way to explain this but to show a 1-minute video of our EWS achievements. There you go. I don't have the audio in that video presentation, but I hope you were able to visually witness our showcase of our early warning system, from risk knowledge to communication to actual building of response capacities. And because time is limited, allow me to continue my presentation through this slide. Next, please. So the city acknowledges and empowers the barangays or our communities as partners for information dissemination and response interventions. And hence, we encourage participatory and community-based reporting on the ground through city personnel and barangay flood spotters assigned to monitor hazards at the street level for redundancy in case of technological failure. The city government of Makati has also made use of the Makatizen application, which incorporates an SOS panic button for our stakeholders to report an incident or emergency on the ground, where flood is one of the incidents that they can quickly report to the Operations Center. All of this we can do because of our very strong governance structure. Following the mandated establishment of multi-departmental and multi-sectoral DRRM Council and permanent DRRM office, we ensure our vertical and horizontal coordination, collaboration, and partnership with various agencies. On this slide, I also want to point out that the Makati DRRM Council and our DRRM office do not only work on our own. We ensure harmonization and collaboration with various city local special bodies like Makati City Development Council, Environmental Protection Council, Gender and Development Council, and even our Child Protection Council, among others. And these are basically the local special bodies with roles in achieving the city's commitment to the SFDRR, COP21, and SDG. We are not where we are right now if not for our international partners and collaborators. We are very fortunate that our resilience efforts are being recognized by many international organizations that make our city, through Mayor Abby Binay, secure leadership posts in various organizations with climate and disaster resilience advocacies and commitments. So just before I let you go, let me share with you these 4 key takeaways from my presentation. First, as cities, we have to make sure that our interventions are science-based and risk-based in approach. Second, we have to recognize the contributions of our stakeholders in the city's resilience journey, and hence, we must ensure harmonization of city and community-based practices. Third, in order to effectively engage our stakeholders, we should have target-specific interventions and, if possible, put in a little bit of creativity in our disaster preparedness activities. And all of this can only happen if we ensure strong disaster risk governance. And Makati is very much grateful that Mayor Abby Binay has a strong stance in making resilience as a way of life in Makati by providing skills, knowledge, and equipment to the youths, individuals, high-risk families and communities, city government personnel, and even our business community. In Makati, resilience is indeed everybody's business because we believe that with the cooperation and of the different sectors of the community and the city, we can continue building a resilient Makati. Thank you, and I hope you get inspired by Makati once again. And if you want to know more, we'll be sharing our contact information to the Secretariat.
Thank you very much, Ms. Ramos. Maraming salamat po for the insightful presentation, and I'm sure the participants learned a lot from the experience from the Makati City and also the 4 important key takeaways from your presentation. From Manila, from Makati, we will fly to Jakarta to welcome Dr. Surjono for his presentation on flood mitigation and flood management, the experience of Jakarta, Indonesia. Dr. Surjono is currently the head of Regional Development Planning Agency or Bapeda of Jakarta, Indonesia. Dr. Nasruddin completed his Bachelor of International Relations from Pajajaran University and Bachelor of Urban and Regional Planning from Bandung Institute of Technology. He continued his Master in Economics at the University of Indonesia and also Master of International Business in Ajo University, South Korea. Afterwards, he continued his doctorate in economics at the University of Indonesia. He is currently in the post of Bapeda head from January 2020. Mr. Surjono, the time and screen is yours. Thank you very much.
Thank you, moderator, Mr. Nizam Bisri. Good afternoon from Jakarta. Distinguished Datuk Mahadi, Mayor of Kuala Lumpur, Bu Bernadia, Secretary General UCLG ASPAC, and distinguished all of panelists, and participants. This is a good opportunity for us to exchange information among us about the resilience strategy. I would like to present about Jakarta resilience strategy. Jakarta, next slide, please. Jakarta is one of the world's biggest cities that is vulnerable to various shocks and stresses. With population reaching 10.8 million people in 2021, an area which is dominated with low land, with an average elevation of 7 meters above sea level. Heavy rainfall and crossed by 13 rivers. Jakarta is especially prone to floods. This is vulnerable rises because Jakarta is located on a delta and the Pacific Rings of fire. Therefore, shock in the form of floods and earthquakes are the main threat. To overcome the threat, Jakarta needs to be more resilient and prepare better in the future with comprehensive resilience strategy. Next slide. Urban resilience is the capacity of individual, community, institution, business, and system within the cities to survive, adapt, and grow no matter what kind of chronic stresses and acute shock that they experience. Jakarta is a metropolitan city vulnerable to disaster and the impact of climate change. This is evidenced by the high number of disasters and the high level of vulnerable impact of climate change in Jakarta. Major shock in Jakarta, such as flood, fire, earthquake, and landslide, while the major stresses are climate change, land subsidence, pollution, and traffic congestion. In 2021, there are 72 flood cases and 536 fire cases, 12 landslide cases, and 2 extreme weather events in Jakarta. Next slide. As a major shock in Jakarta, flood is our main concern. There are 2 causes of flooding in Jakarta, namely river overflow. Rivers that cross the Jakarta area are prone to overflow when there is rain in the upper reaches of the river with high intensity and long duration. And then secondly, local rain that occur in Jakarta area fills water-based and sunken area, and it occur with high intensity and long duration, causes water not be accommodated and overflow, causing flooding. And then thirdly is tidal flood, also known as tidal seawater, occur in the coastal or seaside area or northern part of Jakarta. So we have an upstream and also downstream and seaside area of Jakarta. Okay, next slide. Here are maps of flood risk in Jakarta, with the majority of northern part of Jakarta being the most vulnerable to flood. Jakarta is vision for resilience to provide equal opportunity for its citizens to live safe, healthy, happy, and prosperous through innovation and public services. This vision is supported by 3 main pillars, with good governance, social cohesion, a supporting pillar. And there are 12 direction and 32 strategy. The first pillar is well-prepared Jakarta. Jakarta is expected to be well-prepared city to face any shock, including risk of disaster and impact of climate change. Jakarta effort to be well-prepared is by creating climate kampung initiative, construction of infiltration wells, air pollution control, and urban farming. And then second pillar is healthy Jakarta. Jakarta aims to be a healthy city which guarantees accessible to services of clean water, wastewater, and sustainable solid waste management. There are many efforts related to healthy Jakarta, such as river naturalization and normalization, rain water harvesting to keep water and waste bank and intermediate treatment facility. And then the pillar is connected Jakarta. Jakarta strives to be a city that promotes connectivity and mobility of each people by providing accessibility, integrated transportation, and people engaged through accessible communication system, creating integrated and sustainable transportation through MRT, electrified Transjakarta buses, and implementing Jakarta Smart City. Next slide. In terms of flood mitigation and management policy, Jakarta government have several policies, such as normalization and naturalization of rivers and reservoir, and construction of coastal embankment and river estuary in northern part of Jakarta, older system development and revitalization of water, and construction of infiltration and biobore well, or called vertical drainage. And we make agreement among cities surrounding Jakarta. This is important point in order to harmonize the policy with the surrounding city around Jakarta. We have central regional cooperation in spatial planning and flood control in Jakarta. Bogor is surrounding area of Jakarta. So Jakarta cannot anticipate by Jakarta itself, but we have to make collaboration with cities surrounding Jakarta. Next, there are several phases in flood management in Jakarta. In mitigation and preparedness stage, the government mobilized officers to drain waterways, dredge river and reservoir, repair pumps, and operate mobile pumps. Then, when flood occurs, the officer activate the flood control pump, place mobile pump, deploy officer at flood inundation point, and deploy disaster emergency response command. After the flood control pump is still activated to speed up the subsidence of the flood, and cooperation with the fire department is done to clean up the places where the flood occurred. The Jakarta Disaster Mitigation Agency and Jakarta Water Resource Management Services are regional work unit directly involved in flood disaster management. One of the agency has a task at technical level to provide flood control infrastructure, including upgrading the data system for local rainfall information. And BPBD, or Jakarta Disaster Mitigation Agency, prepare early warning system that include evacuation action during and after the flood. Next slide. Flood response in Jakarta has been done. Next slide, please. Done with the collaboration between government as well as the community. Here are some examples of collaboration in the picture. There are many collaboration between community and government of Jakarta. With the rapid development of technology, next slide, a system is needed that is able to predict potential disasters before they occur and optimize handling when a disaster occurs. Utilization of Internet of Things based technology for data monitoring in real time can be integrated with the ability to apply artificial intelligence technology, the analysis process to produce an accurate and fast decision support system. Alhamdulillah, in 2022, in this year, Jakarta provincial government has won the flood control system innovation in World Summit on the Information Society Crisis and IDC Smart City Asia Pacific World. The Jakarta flood control system exists as a database policy to detect potential inundated area with the water. The system collects historical data and knowledge, as well as perform predictive analysis, and to help improve disaster awareness, accelerated system-based responses, and conduct real-time monitoring. Key components of the flood control system include artificial intelligence capability of Internet of Things, device pool and process massive amount of data, and use machine learning system to improve model accuracy. And then statistic statistical analysis system, Internet of Things analytic, and also IoT platform with sensor and weather data to gain real-time situational awareness and predict where flooding may occur. Event stream processing analytic enable data to be downloaded within 5 minutes. Every 60 minutes, and capability to provide input for the warning alert and decision recommendation. Capability to provide input of give early warning and data management and analytic model management, and also asset management. I would like to conclude the presentation here. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Dr. Sarjono, for the timely presentation and also insight. And congratulations for the achievement of the Jakarta at the World Forum on the Smart City and also flood application. My apologies, we are running a little bit behind, but we would like to welcome any questions or comments from the floor, if any. Could you kindly raise your hand? And based on my reading, I haven't seen any questions on the chat room. Does anyone want to ask? If not, since Hirata-sama need to leave earlier, Hirata-sama, do you have any comments or even reaction for the presentation from Sarah or from Ms. Ramos and also from Dr. Surjono? If you're comfortable to provide your final statement / comments to the other presenters. Mr. Kendra? All right. Hearing none, I would like to raise a question then to use my power as a moderator to Dr. Surjono and also Ms. Ramos, reflecting from the presentation from Sarah about systemic risk and also cascading risk. I would like to call upon and ask to what extent Jakarta and also Makati have tried to really understand systematically this systemic and also cascading risk, and to what extent the evaluation of the risk have been performed in both Makati and Jakarta respectively. Perhaps Ms. Ramos or Pak Nasruddin first.
Okay, start for me.
Thank you, Pak.
Thank you, Pak Nizam. Actually, yeah, when we talk about this, to overcome resilient strategy, we have to think systemic thinking. We have to know about the input and output and process of the result of output. So, for example, in Jakarta, we know the inputs come from rainfall, and we can calculate the process. And here we have to calculate how we can accept water from the rainfall, and we can calculate the amount of I mean, all of the system we have standardized how to monitor the risk. And of course, for example, Jakarta, the floods come from instead of upstream or downstream. From upstream, we have to monitor the weather from upstream, and so we can calculate when the flood will be coming from upstream level, and then in Jakarta at what time we have to. So we have prediction more accurate, and then the other we have also to overcome sea level rises from northern part of Jakarta. So all of area in Jakarta we have to monitor by CCTV or by maybe like we monitor all of the how to overcome the flood in Jakarta. So I mean, based on data, scientific, and of course collaboration with the society, I think will be needed to overcome this.
Thank you. Thank you, Pak Nasruddin. Ms. Ramos, you care to comment on this? Yeah.
Sure. Well, of course, Makati's interventions is not very much different from what Jakarta just presented or shared with us now. No. We also, well, first and foremost, we acknowledge that systemic risks are existing, you know. While Makati is very small, I mean, we're just 4% in terms of land area, as consisting of the whole Metro Manila, no? So we're just 4% of that land area. It's very small. It's in the heart of Metro Manila. We're basically can be considered a catch basin, particularly for weather system. We're practically surrounded by bodies of water. So really, number one is ecosystem-based approach, really. While the jurisdiction of Makati in terms of ecosystem-based resilience planning is very, very limited, we leverage on our collaboration and coordination with the Metro Manila Development Authority, the national and regional government agencies, as well as our neighboring cities. So in all of our interventions, particularly maybe not on disaster preparedness, but on a more holistic approach of resilience building, we make sure that even if we're just a portion of Metro Manila, our relationship with our neighboring cities are also good. You know, in terms of infrastructure interventions, our ecosystem, our natural ecosystem interventions are harmonized. But even if, for example, of course, we cannot erase the fact that there are varying capacities amongst the local governments here in the Philippines. Even if we invest too much or we invest enough for us to, you know, mitigate the impacts of risks in the city, there are still, you know, challenges because of the transboundary considerations. Again, another point there is, you know, risk acceptance. Accepting as well that fact is, of course, to not only work within your jurisdiction, but, you know, innovate and co-create solutions with other cities, with other stakeholders. I think these are the things, you know, these are innovations, maybe, if I may call it, especially with the limitations of local governments. So partnership, collaboration, co-creation with different stakeholders, again, recognizing that systemic risks are existing is a very important factor.
Thank you very much, Ms. Ramos and Pak Nasruddin, for sharing the experience of Makati and also Jakarta. Do you have any question from the floor? Could you please kindly raise your hand, sir or madam? Okay, hearing none, I will address another question to Sarah. We have listened to the experience from Makati and also Jakarta, and I would like to ask to UNDRR how and to what extent the recommendations from GAR, the Global Assessment Report, and also the recent scoping study on systemic and cascading risk can be applicable for city, especially, of course, considering that across the globe, across Asia Pacific, there are medium cities and small cities. And at the end of the day, how to increase the number of cities that implementing the MCR 2030 roadmap. what would be the first step? Yes, thank you.
Yeah, thank you for the question. And I know there was a lot packed into the recommendations, but I think you've just heard from the examples of Jakarta, from the examples of Makati, and also some of the examples from Yokohama, some of the ways. And I think that Lisa has well put her finger on it in terms of innovating with stakeholders, she said, co-creating and partnership. And they may sound like buzzwords, but all of this requires an integrated and collaborative risk governance system. So I think this requires, many cities actually are steering some of the larger economies in a country, right? Cities have power, the larger cities and urban centers, and then even the smaller cities and townships. People have power and they need to work with the national governments. They need to work with the subnational counterparts, and they need to continue to work through the groups, the associations that enable the engagement of local governments like UCLG, like ICLE and others. This is very critical in order to enable to make the connections, to share experience, to share ways to address risk, and then to take that knowledge and to localize it. But this can only be done really by working with the people. So then it has to be this people-centered approach. So again, innovating with stakeholders, as Lisa said, or putting people at the center. And I think that is really at the crux actually of the GAR recommendations. The GAR talks about the Global Assessment Report for Disaster Risk Reduction, or GAR 22, talks about designing systems that factor in also people's perceptions of risk and biases. So this includes including them in conversations. It talks about reconfiguring governance as well as the financial systems to ensure design and consultation. This is about ensuring transparency and participation. We've seen some examples of that in the presentations today in terms of trying to access and interlink local data or using available data, but yet it was recognized that there can still be bottlenecks. So we need to work together to reduce those bottlenecks through the risk governance system. So stepping up participation, transparency, and citizen dialogue, and then ensuring a participation and greater link with the national governments. I think really if you can strengthen the national local, this will go also a long way for local to share their experience. And I just wanted to touch on one last point, and that is that partnership. I think we heard from Dr. Bernardo at the beginning, right, that partnership is country and city, but also community and linking to citizens. And we've heard from the example again of Makati about not having partnership just within the city or within the country, but also international partnerships. So I think partnership too needs to be looked at in a broad sense. There's really a lot of not only goodwill, but very good knowledge and tools and resources. So how to do that through making cities resilient? Please join us. If you join MCR 2030, you will find access to many benchmarking and planning and assessment tools through the various core members, but also through the service providers, over 200 now, matching up their services with available cities. And I'll put that link in the chat. Over.
Thank you very much, Sarah, for the comprehensive explanation and also some recommendation, actionable recommendation for our participants here in the webinar. I think we are approaching the end of this webinar. Unless we have an intervention from the floor, questions or comments, we can accommodate one or two, if any. If not, I want to address one more question to Pak Nasruddin and Ms. Ramos over here. After all the achievement, after all the resilient building journey by Jakarta and Makati, by the end of 2022 and until 2030, what is the biggest obstacle now? What is the biggest obstacle and challenge for Jakarta and Makati? Maybe we can go with Ms. Ramos first. So we Switching order.
Okay. Well, well, maybe I can echo some of the takeaways that I got as well from the recent GPDRR in Bali. No, first, it's really about data governance. I think there's also a lot of discussions in our today's session talking about data governance. That's very challenging. It requires a lot of investments financially and well, not only financially, even institutionally, the availability of equipment, the acceptance of the community to use such technologies, for and understanding really of the risks at the community level is also something that has to be, addressed. It's still a challenge. We can do a lot of disaster preparedness activities, but usually they are, participating maybe because of the prizes, maybe because of the creativity in our interventions, but really, understanding these risks at the deeper level, it requires, a lot of convincing, a lot of relationship building, a lot of co-creation and then co-ownership of different interventions. And we can only do that if we have very good data, very good governance structure, as Sarah mentioned earlier. And, again, that soft intervention of transparency, trust, and relationship building. And these are things that really cannot be, put in our plans in a very, very concrete way. These are interventions that we need to build every now and then, because it may also collapse. And without this relationship with our different stakeholders, we really cannot achieve our resilience vision. The city can only do so much. And again, as cliche as it may be, resilience is still everybody's business. So yeah, I think that basic concept of making resilience everybody's business is still a challenge at this point. Not because they are not very much into it, but maybe because of the level of understanding of the risks, the level of the understanding of the impact of these hazards to their daily lives. And that's also the reason why we try to make our interventions, disaster preparedness interventions, very creative, just to get their attention and, trigger them or motivate them to really do their part. Because again, it's everybody's business.
Thank you so much, Ms. Ramos. Pak Nasruddin, what's the main obstacle and challenge now for Jakarta after all the achievement?
Thank you. Actually, this is an important question. When we talk about resilience strategy, I think important things about the awareness of the people related, and also policymaker, in order to make a policy that sustainable development in the future. So, for example, planning is important here because, for example, the flood in Jakarta, because of the massive development of housing in upstream area, and then also, so the awareness of the people is important thing, and also the development in near the sea or it also happen because it could be more risk. Then I think we have to make like spatial planning to overcome these issues. And besides that, finance issues is also important because financing to overcome this flood, for example, we have to develop many system in infrastructure in Jakarta. Is very high cost, but so that's why we need like a collaboration with the central government and also cities surrounding Jakarta. So this is how to we overcome about the issue of finance. And then also in the future, maybe we have issue of climate change that is become a huge impact. For example, in Java, northern part of Java, because of sea level rise, and that's why we have to make a plan. Maybe we have to invest more infrastructure on it instead of awareness of the people itself. So that is important issues that maybe in the future we overcome with good government, social cohesion. We need like direction and strategy to overcome the flood shock and stress in Japan.
Thank you, Pak Nasruddin. Sarah, could you care to comment a little bit with all these problems about leadership component then? What is needed to build the leadership based on MCR 2030 roadmap, if any? And this can be a point of reference for all the participants before we adjourn the webinar. Thank you.
Sure, thank you. No, I think these are really important reflections and huge challenges, but I think that, again, ensuring that we address climate and disaster risk reduction together and is really a role also for the local authorities and the city leaders. We know, I think it was said at the beginning, disasters are really localized, right? And when something does occur, the first response, the first line of leadership is going to be local. And so there's a tremendous amount of power, but also knowledge there. And this is really, reducing risk, increasing resilience, and improving the lives and livelihoods of all citizens is something apolitical. So in terms of leadership, this is something where you can reach across sectors, departments, parties, thought leadership. It's really a very strong agenda, if you will, but it is, as we also pointed out at the beginning, really an existential matter at this point. We need all hands on deck, and I think that local leaders, city leaders, are in a unique position to be able to understand those risks in the local area and know their communities and their stakeholders, and also be able to partner upward towards national government, but also outward across communities, and also across borders, right? Through initiatives like MCR 2030, sharing experience, including governance. In terms of actions, of course, meeting the climate ambition is most critical. So local leaders have a role and have the position to be able to call on departments and divisions to work together, increasingly across the climate and environmental actors, the disaster management and disaster response authorities, but also finance very critically, which Mr. Surjono just mentioned. And the financing is also an area, I think, where the local leadership can really prioritize, but also be quite innovative. In fact, we see a lot of the innovations coming from the cities, for example, issuing green climate bonds and looking for ways to incentivize climate-friendly land use and investment in different sectors. And we've seen also now with COVID, this call for a green recovery. It's not coming only from national and international. This is a demand that's coming from citizens and from people in the locality, in the cities. So I think local leadership has a tremendous role to play around meeting the climate ambition, ensuring the risk governance is cross-sectoral and multi-stakeholder and truly inclusive to engage the citizens, and certainly to influence financing and really measure what we value, reworking the financial systems to address the real costs of risk.
Thank you very much, Sarah, for touching upon the leadership component to overcome all the obstacles and challenges. Distinguished participants, Sir, Madam, and so to conclude, allow me to share some of the summary based on the presentation and also the discussion among the speakers. Hopefully you can see my screen now. This is just a quick summary of what we've been discussed over the past 1.5 to 2 hours. Of course, the essence is on the city to city or peer learning through facilitation of the Making Cities Resilient 2030 program, the facilitation through processes of UCLG ASPAC, the CityNet, and most importantly is actually the experience, the best practices, and even recognition to challenges and opportunities shared by the city of Kuala Lumpur, Makati, Yokohama, and also Jakarta. And looking at the participants today, I saw also some of other local government across Indonesia, Malaysia, and also Asia Pacific countries. So this is the essence of this RLTC 42 and also programs. This is our investment in terms of building the capacity of local government. The speakers also talked about some of the actionable steps by city government and its partners, including to answer the greatest challenge about how well do we know our city, to really measure what's valuable for the cities, its environment, and also the people. And to do so, it's really important to archive and also encourage an integrated, open quality data that cut across all the Can you see my screen now? Thank you very much.
Not yet, Pak.
Just a moment. What about now?
Still not yet.
Interesting. Okay. Okay. I don't mind. So there are 4 actionable items, steps that shared by all the speakers about measuring what's valuable to cities, environment, and the people. It's also about building the leadership and collaboration to design city system that consider how human minds make decisions about risk, including capitalizing on available science, knowledge, and experiences. The third actionable steps is to reconfigure city governance and its vertical intergovernmental aspect and also financial system that can work across silos and design it in the process that consider the needs of the people within the city. And lastly, to ensure presence and availability of ICT, frontier technologies, frontier analysis that can enable risk services that are locally and at the end of the day becomes enabler to build cities resilience and also avoid risk creation. All in all, the steps by city government and its partners, it's not only to meet the SDGs, it's not only to meet SFDRR targets and also indicators, the Paris Agreement, or even the Convention of Biodiversity, but what's more important is to make sure city plan resilience strategies that are meeting the will and well-being of the people and also to ensure quality environment within the inclusive, sustainable, and also resilient cities. So with that, I would like to conclude today's webinar. Once again, thank you very much. Immense gratification and also gratitude to Honorable Datuk Sri Haji Dr. Chandra Dewi, Ms. Sarah Apicella, Mr. Kendra Hirata, Ms. Liza Ramos, and also Dr. Nasruddin Surjono. And with that, I would like to conclude here. Thank you very much and see you all again in the next event. We will see each other in various events on disaster risk reduction and also resilience building. Thank you very much. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Good evening.